The grease under his fingernails was a map of his week. Monday was a transmission fluid stain on his right thumb, a dark crescent moon that refused to yield to industrial-strength soap. Wednesday was the faint, silvery trace of anti-seize from a spark plug job, shimmering under the weak fluorescent light of their tiny Astoria kitchen. Now, it was Friday, and the black grime was a testament to a full day of wrestling with a stubborn engine block on a vintage Ford pickup. It was the smell of his life, a mixture of oil, sweat, and the quiet satisfaction of making something broken work again. That smell, however, was the very thing that made Meredith's nose wrinkle in disgust. She stood by the single, grimy window overlooking the elevated train tracks, the rumble of the N train shaking the cheap wine glasses in their particle board cabinet. She was a porcelain doll in a mechanic's garage, her posture ramrod straight, her expensive perfume a desperate attempt to colonize the air, to overwrite the scent of his honest labor. He earned $58,000 a year in a city that demanded 10 times that just to breathe easy, a fact she recited like a prayer of resentment. Their one-bedroom apartment, with its peeling paint and rattling radiator, was a cage, and the $2,800 rent was the monthly tightening of the bars. He watched her stare out at the river of yellow cabs on the street below, her reflection a portrait of simmering fury. He knew what was coming. He could feel it in the oppressive silence that had filled the space between them for months. A silence far louder than the city itself. Lily, their one-year-old daughter, was asleep in her crib in the corner of the living room that served as their bedroom. A tiny, perfect being oblivious to the fault line, cracking beneath her family. Finally, Meredith turned, her face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. "We're going to Connecticut tomorrow," she announced, her voice as crisp and cold as a winter morning. "My Aunt Carol is sick. We need to go see her." Ben felt a cold knot form in his gut. He had never once heard her mention an Aunt Carol in the 5 years they'd been together. The object of Meredith's most potent venom sat in the back of their 10-year-old Honda Civic like a silent accusation. It was a Graco car seat, its sun-faded blue fabric patterned with cartoon bears that had long since lost their cheerfulness. Ben had found it at a garage sale in a wealthier neighborhood, paying $10 for something that would have cost $200 new. He had spent an entire Saturday taking it apart, scrubbing every inch of the plastic shell with disinfectant, laundering the fabric inserts twice, and meticulously reassembling it, checking every strap and buckle against the manufacturer's online manual. To him, it was a fortress of paternal love, a carefully refurbished throne for his daughter, Lily. He had tested the installation himself, yanking on the straps with his full body weight until the entire car rocked on its suspension, ensuring it was anchored as securely as his love for the tiny person it was meant to protect. To Meredith, however, it was a billboard advertising their failure. It was a constant, humiliating reminder of their financial station, a public declaration that they were the kind of people who used other people's cast-offs. She loathed the sight of it. When her friends from the real estate firm, women who discussed Hampton's rentals and carried $1,000 handbags, were nearby, she would strategically position her body to block their view of the car's interior. She spoke of the car seat with a unique brand of vitriol, calling it "that filthy thing," or "the garage sale special." Her disgust was a physical presence in the car, a toxic fume that was more suffocating than the city smog. Every time Ben buckled Lily in, feeling the satisfying click of the 5-point harness, he would catch Meredith's eye in the rearview mirror, and the look she gave him could curdle milk. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about what it represented. It was his practicality versus her ambition, his contentment versus her shame. It was a battleground of worn fabric and scuffed plastic, and as he prepared for their sudden trip to Connecticut, he couldn't shake the feeling that this particular battle was about to escalate into a full-blown war. If you enjoy stories of karma, hidden secrets, and the quiet power of the underestimated, subscribe now to witness how the truth always finds a way to surface. The interior of the 2008 Honda Civic was a small, mobile capsule of their strained existence. The air was thick with the cloying scent of a pine tree air freshener, failing to mask the faint, persistent odor of old upholstery and, more subtly, the lingering ghost of yesterday's French fries. Ben gripped the worn leather of the steering wheel, its surface smooth and shiny from years of his hands turning it through the labyrinth of Queens streets. In the rearview mirror, he could see Lily, a cherubic curve of a cheek and a wisp of blonde hair, sleeping soundly in the Graco throne he had so painstakingly secured. Her gentle, rhythmic breathing was the only peaceful sound in the car. Beside him, Meredith was a statue of ice, She stared out the passenger window, her jaw set, her reflection showing a woman who was already a million miles away. She hadn't spoken a word since they'd crossed the Triborough Bridge, leaving the familiar skyline of Manhattan to shrink behind them. The silence wasn't empty. It was dense and charged, filled with unspoken accusations and years of accumulated resentment. Ben tried to breach it, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the confined space. "So, what exactly is wrong with Aunt Carol?" he asked, aiming for a tone of casual concern. Meredith didn't turn. "I don't want to talk about it," she clipped, her words sharp enough to cut glass. He tried again. "Did you remember to pack Lily's favorite blanket? The yellow one?" A sharp sigh was his only answer. He gave up, letting the oppressive quiet reclaim the car. The rhythmic thud-thud of the tires on the expansion joints of I-87 became a maddening drumbeat, counting down to something he couldn't name but could feel in the marrow of his bones. He glanced at the fuel gauge. It was hovering just above empty. He'd meant to fill up last night, but Meredith had been in one of her moods, and he just wanted to get home and not provoke her. Now, the glowing orange fuel light seemed to mock him. Another small failure in a long list she kept meticulously cataloged in her mind. The argument didn't erupt. It was uncorked, a slow, deliberate release of poison that had been fermenting for years. It began, as it often did, with a seemingly innocuous observation from Meredith, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Of course you forgot to get gas," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending pity that was far more insulting than outright anger. She finally turned to look at him, her eyes cold and clinical, as if he were a specimen under a microscope. "It's just so typical, Ben. You can spend a whole day tinkering with someone else's broken-down truck, but you can't manage the one simple thing that keeps our own family from being stranded on the side of a highway." He felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the flush of shame and anger. "I was going to do it this morning, Mare. You were the one in a rush to leave," he defended, his voice tight. "It was a mistake. Showing any sign of defense was like blood in the water." "Oh, I'm the one in a rush?" she scoffed, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her lips. "I'm rushing to go see my sick aunt, a concept of family obligation you wouldn't understand. Your world is about as big as the grease pit you work in." The attack broadened, becoming an all-encompassing critique of his life, his profession, his very being. She weaponized his $58 salary, contrasting it with the 7-figure commission checks she saw her senior partners receive. She derided his dream of one day owning his own small, honest garage as pathetic and small-minded. Then, her eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, landing on the car seat. "And that," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "is the perfect symbol of your entire philosophy. Second-hand. Used. Just good enough. You've chained me and my daughter to your pathetic, just good enough life, and I am suffocating in it." His hands clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. The air in the car was thin, impossible to breathe. He felt every word as a physical blow, dismantling him piece by piece, right there on the interstate, as his daughter slept peacefully behind them, oblivious to her father's complete and utter demolition. With a final, contemptuous sigh, Meredith gestured sharply toward an upcoming exit. "Pull in there," she commanded, her voice devoid of any emotion save for a chilling finality. The sign was faded green, announcing an Apex Fuel and Retail at the end of the ramp. It was one of those lonely, forgotten service stations that dot the highways in between major towns, an island of flickering fluorescent light in a sea of dark, anonymous woods. It looked desolate, almost abandoned. There were no other cars at the pumps, and the convenience store attached to the station had a dim, unwelcoming glow. The paint on the sign was peeling, and one of the massive letters in Apex was dark. Ben guided the Honda down the ramp, the car's engine sputtering a warning as it rolled to a stop beside a pump that looked like a relic from a bygone era. The air outside was cold and smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and the sharp, chemical tang of gasoline. A single elderly man in a grease-stained blue jumpsuit was slowly sweeping the concrete near the entrance to the store, his movements methodical and unhurried. He was the only sign of life. The place had an unsettling stillness, a silence that was profound after the drone of the highway. It felt like the edge of the world, a place where journeys ended. Meredith killed the engine, and the ensuing silence inside the car was absolute and terrifying. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked over at her, but she refused to meet his gaze, her profile etched against the sickly yellow light of the station. He wanted to say something, anything to break the spell, to rewind the last 30 minutes, to go back to the familiar, simmering resentment of their apartment, which suddenly seemed like a paradise compared to this cold, isolated purgatory. She unbuckled her seatbelt with a decisive metallic click that echoed in the silence like a gunshot. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his soul, that this wasn't just a stop for gas. Meredith turned to him, but her eyes were like polished stones, offering no entry. "I need some air," she said, the words perfectly formed and utterly meaningless. It was the kind of line delivered in a movie just before the betrayal, a piece of dialogue so cliché it felt surreal. He watched, paralyzed, as she opened her door. The car's interior light flickered on, illuminating the strained, artificial calm on her face. She didn't look back at Lily, sleeping in her second-hand throne. She didn't give him a final glance of anger or sadness or anything at all. There was just a void, a terrifying emptiness where a wife and a mother should have been. She stepped out of the car, her heels crunching on the loose gravel of the parking lot. The sound was unnervingly loud in the quiet night. She walked toward the convenience store with a determined stride, her silhouette framed for a moment in the doorway's weak light, before she disappeared inside. Ben sat there, his hands still gripping the steering wheel, his mind refusing to process what his gut was screaming at him. He told himself she was just cooling off. She was buying a soda, maybe some aspirin. She would come back out in a few minutes, her anger slightly diffused, and they would continue their miserable journey in silence. He focused on the rhythmic rise and fall of Lily's chest, the soft puff of her breath fogging a small circle on the cold window. She was his anchor in this swirling vortex of dread. He counted the seconds, which stretched into minutes. 5 minutes. 10. The old man finished his sweeping and went inside. The station was utterly still again, just the hum of the drink coolers and the distant drone of a truck on the highway. A cold, creeping fear began to snake its way up his spine, a primal terror that was worse than any argument. He realized he was holding his breath, and had been for a very, very long time. The minutes bled into one another, forming a thick, viscous pool of time that seemed to have no end. 15 minutes. 20. The logical part of his brain, the mechanics mind that diagnosed problems and found solutions, was short-circuiting. It kept offering rationalizations. The line inside was long. She was having a long chat with the cashier. Her phone died, and she was using the payphone. But there was no line. There was no one else here. The station was a ghost ship on a black ocean. Finally, the dread became a physical force, compelling him to move. He unbuckled his seatbelt, the sound echoing the one Meredith had made. Only his was filled with hesitation, not finality. The cold night air was a shock to his system, sharp and unforgiving. He walked to the front of the convenience store, his worn work boots making soft, uncertain sounds on the pavement. He cupped his hands around his eyes and peered through the large plate glass window, past the faded beer advertisements and the pyramid of dusty oil cans. The interior was brightly lit and sterile. He saw the old man from before, now sitting on a stool behind the counter, methodically reading a newspaper. He saw aisles stocked with chips and candy bars, a coffee machine with a single pot brewing, a rack of forlorn-looking keychains. He saw everything except what he was desperately looking for. There was no sign of Meredith. He scanned the entire store, his eyes darting from corner to corner. She wasn't by the coolers, not in the single aisle, not near the magazine rack. It was a small, one-room store. There was nowhere to hide. His gaze fell upon a small, inconspicuous door at the back of the store, marked with a simple, employees only sign. A new, more sickening possibility began to form. A thought so monstrous he tried to push it away. He looked back at his car, at the dark shape of the car seat inside, and the truth hit him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs and leaving him gasping in the cold, empty darkness. Just as the full, crushing weight of his reality was about to bring him to his knees, the convenience store door creaked open. The old man in the blue jumpsuit stepped out, wiping his hands on a red rag tucked into his belt. He wasn't a large man, but he carried himself with a quiet authority, his posture straight despite his age. His face was a roadmap of a long life, etched with deep lines around his eyes and mouth. But his eyes themselves were surprisingly sharp and intelligent. They weren't filled with pity, but with a clear, discerning appraisal of the situation. He had seen the whole pathetic drama unfold. The angry arrival, the woman's purposeful stride into his store and straight out the back exit, the waiting luxury car that had peeled out onto the service road moments later, and now the young man left behind, a ghost at the pumps with a baby in the back seat. "She's not in there," the old man said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It wasn't a question. Took off out the back, got into a black Mercedes that was waiting for her. He delivered the information without malice. A simple statement of fact. Ben just stared at him, the words registering but not fully connecting. The old man, whose name tag read, Gene, let the silence hang for a moment before he spoke again. Looks like you're in a bit of a bind, son. Tank's on empty, and I'd wager your wallet is too. He gestured with his head toward the store. Coffee's fresh. There's a landline on the counter if you need to make a call. No charge. The offer was simple, practical. It was a small act of kindness in a moment of profound cruelty. A steady hand offered to a man who was drowning. For the first time that night, Ben felt a flicker of something other than fear and despair. A microscopic spark of human connection in the vast, uncaring darkness. The walk into the store was a blur. The bright, sterile light felt like an assault on his senses after the comforting darkness outside. The smell of stale coffee and cleaning fluid filled his nostrils. Gene pointed to a black rotary-style phone on the end of the counter, a relic from another time. Ben's hands trembled as he picked up the heavy receiver. The dial tone was a loud, monotonous hum in his ear, a sound he hadn't heard in years. He fumbled in his wallet, his fingers clumsy and numb, and found the crumpled piece of paper where he'd written down Meredith's mother's number long ago. First, he tried Meredith's cell. He dialed the familiar number, his thumb pressing the buttons with a desperate hope. The call went immediately to a cold, robotic voice. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. Disconnected. Not off, not out of service area. Disconnected. She had planned this. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. He took a deep, shuddering breath and dialed her mother. The phone rang 3 times before a wary voice answered. Hello? He cleared his throat, which felt like it was full of sand. Brenda, it's Ben. I'm with Meredith. We were on our way to see Aunt Carol and... He trailed off, unsure how to explain the impossible. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Aunt Carol? Brenda's voice was sharp with confusion and suspicion. Ben, my sister Carol passed away 6 years ago. What on earth are you talking about? And I haven't spoken to Meredith in a week. The final lie clicked into place, the last support beam of his old life giving way. It was all a fabrication. The sick aunt, the trip, everything. It was a meticulously constructed exit strategy. He hung up the phone without saying goodbye, the plastic receiver clattering into its cradle. He leaned against the counter, the cheap linoleum cold against his back. He was alone, stranded at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, with a sleeping child, a disconnected phone number, and less than $20 to his name. The trap had been sprung, and he was caught. Gene had been quietly restocking a shelf with beef jerky, his back to Ben, but he had heard every word of the one-sided conversation. He didn't say, "I told you so," or offer any empty platitudes. He simply turned, his expression unreadable, and placed a steaming styrofoam cup of coffee on the counter. "Drink this," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You're no good to that little girl in the car if you fall apart." Ben stared at the cup, the steam rising in a lazy curl. He felt a wave of shame wash over him, the hot, bitter sting of being seen in his moment of absolute humiliation. He was a cliché, the fool left by his wife, but Gene's gaze wasn't judgmental. It was practical, assessing. He was looking at Ben not as a victim, but as a man with a problem that needed solving. After a long silence, Gene spoke again. "I've got a small apartment upstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and it's warm. The night shift guy called in sick. I could use a hand stocking shelves and cleaning up until morning. I'll pay you a fair wage for the hours." Ben looked up, startled. He had expected pity, maybe a few dollars for gas to get to the next town, but not this. Not an offer of work, of shelter. It was a lifeline, thrown with no sentimentality but with undeniable purpose. He looked through the window at his car, where his entire world was sleeping in a faded blue car seat. He had no gas, no money, and nowhere to go. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. The choice wasn't a choice at all. "Okay," Ben heard himself say, his voice hoarse. "Okay, thank you." Gene just nodded, as if the matter was settled. "Good. Let's get your daughter settled in upstairs first. No sense in her sleeping in a cold car." The offer was more than just a place to stay for the night. It was the first step onto a path he never could have imagined, laid by a man whose true identity remained a carefully guarded secret. The first few days in the small apartment above the Apex station were a surreal haze of exhaustion and grief. The space was Spartan but immaculate. consisting of a small bedroom, a tiny bathroom, and a combination living room and kitchenette. It smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and old wood. Ben's world had shrunk to these 4 rooms and the gas station below. During the day, while Lily napped or played with a small collection of toys Jean had mysteriously produced from a storage closet, Ben worked. He learned the rhythm of the station, the ebb and flow of customers that peaked during morning and evening commutes. He mopped the floors of the convenience store until the linoleum shined, restocked the coolers with military precision, and learned how to clean the complex nozzles of the gas pumps. He even found a strange comfort in the menial labor. It was physical, tangible. It left no room for the spiraling thoughts that threatened to consume him in the quiet moments. At night, he would sit by the window, watching the endless river of headlights on the highway, each one a life going somewhere, while his own had come to a dead stop. He would hold a sleeping Lily in his arms, her small body warm against his chest, and fight back the waves of failure and despair. He was a mechanic, a man who fixed things, yet his own life was shattered into a million pieces he had no idea how to put back together. Jean watched him from a distance, never intruding on his grief, but always present. He would leave a hot meal outside the apartment door in the evenings, or appear with a fresh pot of coffee just when Ben's energy was flagging. He was an observer, a quiet evaluator, and Ben had the distinct feeling he was being tested, his every action weighed and measured for some unknown purpose. The humility of it all was a constant, grinding weight. But for Lily, he would bear it. He would clean 1,000 toilets and stock 1,000,000 shelves if it meant she had a safe, warm place to lay her head, far from the cold ambition that had cast them aside. After a week of silent observation, Jean began to talk. It started simply. During a lull in customers one afternoon, Jean was poring over a stack of invoices at the counter, a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "See this, Ben?" he said, tapping a finger on a line item. "This is our cost for a case of soda from the distributor. And this," he pointed to the price tag on the cooler door, "is what we sell it for. The difference is the margin, but it's not just profit. Out of that margin, you have to pay for the electricity to run this cooler. My salary, your salary, the rent on this land, the insurance. The actual profit is a tiny sliver of that difference." He began to break down the entire operation of the store as if it were a complex engine. He explained the delicate dance of supply chain logistics, showing Ben how ordering too much of a slow-moving item meant tying up capital in dead inventory, while ordering too little of a popular one meant lost sales. He called it the science of the shelf. Ben, whose mind was accustomed to understanding the intricate systems of an automobile, found himself fascinated. He saw the parallels immediately. A clogged fuel line in a car was like a delayed shipment from a supplier. A faulty spark plug was like an employee who wasn't doing their job. The entire gas station was a machine, and Jean was teaching him how every single part of it worked in perfect, profitable harmony. He started asking questions, his natural curiosity as a mechanic taking over. He wanted to know why they used one brand of coffee over another, how the gasoline pricing was determined, why certain items were placed at eye level near the checkout counter. Jean answered every question with patience and a surprising depth of knowledge, a small smile playing on his lips. He was seeing beyond the grease-stained hands and the broken heart, recognizing a sharp, analytical mind that had been lying dormant. For the first time in a long time, Ben felt a spark of something other than survival. He felt the thrill of learning. One rainy Tuesday, about a month into Ben's new life, Jean called him into the small, cluttered back office. The room was filled with filing cabinets and smelled of old paper. Jean closed the door and gestured for Ben to sit. "There's something you should know," he began, his tone more serious than Ben had ever heard it. "My name is Jean Holloway, and I own this gas station." Ben nodded slowly, not quite understanding the significance. "Okay," he said. Jean smiled wryly. "I don't just own this one, Ben. I own all of them. All 482 Apex fuel and retail locations in the country." He let the statement land, watching Ben's reaction. Ben felt his jaw go slack. He looked around the tiny, cramped office, at the man in the simple blue jumpsuit, and tried to reconcile that image with the owner of a national corporation, a company he now realized must be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "I started this company with this very station, 50 years ago," Jean continued. "My wife, God rest her soul, worked that counter right alongside me. We never had children. When she passed, all the corporate headquarters and boardrooms felt empty. So, I come back here. Reminds me of what's real." From that day on, the lessons changed. They moved from the price of a candy bar to the complexities of corporate finance and real estate acquisition. Jean spread county maps across the office floor, showing Ben how he analyzed traffic patterns and demographic data to determine where to build the next Apex station. He taught Ben how to read the air in the apartment had a texture. It was thin and cold, like the inside of a refrigerator. Ben could feel it on his bare arms as he sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap mattress springs groaning under his weight in protest. Morning light, a weak, apologetic gray filtered through the grimy windows of their Astoria one-bedroom, did little to warm the space. It only served to illuminate the stark, clinical emptiness Meredith had curated. Across the room, she was already a finished product, a portrait of aspirational wealth. She stood by the kitchen counter, wrapped in a silk robe the color of champagne, a garment that cost more than their weekly groceries. Her back was to him as she sipped black coffee from a minimalist white ceramic mug, one she'd ordered from a boutique in Soho. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was an active, oppressive force, a vacuum that sucked all the warmth and life from the room. Ben's world was one of noise, the roar of an engine, the clatter of a wrench, the hiss of a pneumatic gun. But here in his own home, the quiet was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. He could hear the faint, rhythmic breathing of their daughter, Lily, from the crib tucked into the corner of the living room, a sound that was both his anchor and the reason he endured this suffocating stillness. He watched Meredith's reflection in the dark screen of the microwave. Her expression was placid, her posture perfect. She was performing for an audience that wasn't there, practicing for the life she believed she deserved, a life in which he was merely a temporary, embarrassing footnote. He knew that any move he made, any sound he introduced into her carefully constructed morning tableau, would be an unwelcome intrusion, a reminder of the reality she was so desperate to escape. He needed to get ready for work, a process that felt like a deliberate act of defiance in this sterile environment. His side of the room was a small island of tolerated clutter in Meredith's sea of minimalist order. He reached for his watch on the particle board nightstand, its fake wood grain peeling at the corners. The watch was a Timex, a gift from his father years ago, its face scratched and its stainless steel case dulled from countless encounters with engine blocks and stubborn bolts. The leather strap was dark with sweat and oil, softened to the exact shape of his wrist. It was a tool, reliable and unpretentious, its steady ticking a quiet counterpoint to the frantic, anxious rhythm of the city. As he fastened the worn buckle, he could feel Meredith's eyes on him, a sensation as palpable as a physical touch. He didn't need to look at her reflection to know the expression on her face. It would be that familiar, subtle tightening of her lips, a microscopic flinch of distaste. His hands, even after scrubbing them raw the night before with industrial-grade soap, still bore the faint map of his labor in the lines of his knuckles and the dark, stubborn crescent of grease under each nail. They were the hands of a man who built and fixed things, a man who worked with the solid, tangible world of steel and oil. To her, they were simply dirty. They were proof of his station, a public declaration of the $58 $1 salary that she considered not a living, but an insult. He was a mechanic, and in her world of seven-figure real estate deals and Hamptons weekends, that was a stain that no amount of soap could ever wash away. If you enjoy stories of karma, hidden secrets, and the quiet power of the underestimated, subscribe now to witness how the truth always finds a way to surface. Next was the coat. He opened the closet door, which always stuck on the warped frame, the scraping sound unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. Her side of the closet was a meticulously organized collection of muted, expensive fabrics. Cashmere sweaters, tailored blazers, silk blouses. His side was a small, compressed block of flannel shirts and worn denim. Hanging on a hook by itself was his work coat, a heavy canvas Carhartt. Its original tan color faded to a pale beige and permanently stained with streaks of black oil and rust-colored transmission fluid. The coat had its own smell, a scent that was uniquely his, a combination of motor oil, metallic dust, and the cold, damp air of the garage. To Ben, it was the smell of honest work, of providing for his family. To Meredith, it was the stench of failure, an olfactory offense that she claimed clung to their furniture and even to her clothes. He ran his hand over the sleeve, feeling the stiff, rugged texture of the canvas, the frayed edge of the cuff, the slight lump of a patch he'd sewn onto the elbow himself. Putting it on was like donning a suit of armor, a protective layer not just against the winter cold, but against the silent, withering judgment that permeated his own home. As he shrugged it on, He saw her out of the corner of his eye. She didn't say a word, but her nose wrinkled almost imperceptibly, a fleeting expression of pure disgust. She turned and poured the rest of her coffee down the sink, as if the very air he now occupied had contaminated it. The simple act of getting dressed for his job had become a territorial dispute, and he was losing ground every single day. The final piece of his daily uniform, the object of Meredith's most concentrated scorn, sat by the front door like a forgotten stray. It was his backpack. It wasn't a sleek leather messenger bag like the ones her male colleagues carried. It was a 15-year-old, faded blue canvas backpack from his high school days, its brand name long since worn away. The fabric was thin in places, the straps were frayed, and one of the zipper pulls had been replaced with a bent paperclip. To Ben, it was just a bag, a functional object for carrying his lunch and a water bottle. To Meredith, it was a mobile monument to their poverty, a tattered flag of a life she refused to claim. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the worn top loop. He could feel her gaze on his back, a focused, burning pressure. He took a breath and picked it up, the familiar weight settling onto his shoulders. The main zipper protested with a grating metallic screech as he pulled it open to double-check its contents. Inside was the lunch he had packed for himself late last night while she slept. A turkey and cheese sandwich on wheat bread, wrapped in plastic wrap, a slightly bruised apple, and a reusable plastic bottle of tap water. It was fuel. It was sustenance. It was the humble reality of their budget. A budget stretched to its breaking point by the city's crushing demands and their $2,800 a month rent. He could feel the shame rising in his chest, a hot, coppery taste in the back of his throat. It wasn't his shame, but hers, a toxic cloud she projected onto him, and he was forced to breathe it in every single morning. "You're not actually taking that thing with you again, are you?" Meredith's voice finally cut through the silence, and it was worse than the silence itself. It wasn't angry or loud. It was flat, cold, and laden with a weary disappointment that was infinitely more cruel. He froze, his hand still on the zipper. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to see her face to picture the condescending pity in her eyes. The word thing hung in the air between them, a carefully chosen weapon designed to dehumanize both the object and its owner. He felt his shoulders slump, the weight of the backpack suddenly feeling like 100 pounds of failure. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. 1,000 angry retorts died on his tongue. He wanted to scream at her, to defend the simple dignity of his lunch, of his job, of his life. But he thought of Lily, sleeping soundly, a tiny, innocent being who deserved a peaceful home, even if that peace was a fragile, one-sided truce. He said nothing. The silence stretched, and her victory was absolute. He slowly, deliberately pulled the zipper closed. The sound was a final, quiet act of surrender. "It's not the bag, Ben," she said, her voice now softer, laced with a mock sympathy that was somehow even more devastating. "It's that you don't even see why it's a problem." The final, dismissive words landed not like a slap, but like the quiet, clinical insertion of a scalpel. He stood there, frozen, the weight of the old backpack a dead thing on his shoulders. He was an obstacle, a piece of furniture that was in the way of her grand redesign of a life that no longer included him. He could feel the chasm between them widening into an uncrossable canyon with every tick of the cheap wall clock. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, her entire demeanor changed. The cold contempt vanished, replaced by a mask of manufactured concern, a performance so jarringly false it made the hair on his arms stand up. She turned to face him fully, her expression a carefully rehearsed portrait of wifely duty. "Ben, honey, I forgot to tell you," she began, her voice now a soft, melodic purr that was more terrifying than her anger. "My Aunt Carol in Connecticut is very ill. We need to go see her. Tomorrow." The name hung in the air, alien and unfamiliar. Aunt Carol. In the 5 years they had been together, through holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings, he had never once heard that name. He mentally scrolled through every story she had ever told him about her family, every anecdote, every complaint. There was no Carol. The lie was so audacious, so poorly constructed, that it could only mean one thing. She didn't care if he believed it. It wasn't a lie meant to deceive. It was a lie meant to be a final, dismissive gesture, a piece of administrative paperwork for a life she was already closing the books on. The blood drained from his face. This wasn't just another argument. This was something else entirely. This was a plan in motion. A cold, methodical dread began to creep up his spine, a primal instinct screaming that he was a man being led to his own execution, and his entire world was about to be stripped away from him. His opportunity came 10 minutes later, a small window of vulnerability in her otherwise impenetrable fortress of a morning routine. The sound he was waiting for was the sharp, definitive click of the bathroom door, followed by the hiss of the shower turning on, a steady, rushing sound that would provide a thin blanket of acoustic cover for his transgression. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs, each beat a deafening thud in the silent apartment. He was about to cross a line from which there was no return, to violate a trust that he now realized had probably never existed in the first place. His target sat on the corner of their shared dresser, a place of honor amidst her perfumes and jewelry boxes. It was her handbag, a Michael Kors tote, a recent purchase she had called an investment in her career, its price tag the equivalent of a full week of his take-home pay. It was made of a stiff black Saffiano leather, its surface cross-hatched and cool to the touch, exuding an aura of untouchable luxury. It smelled of her perfume, a scent called Black Orchid that was floral, but with a heavy, almost funereal undertone, and the clean, chemical scent of expensive leather. To him, it was a foreign embassy on his own territory, a symbol of the world she was so desperate to join, a world that had no place for a man with grease under his fingernails. His hand trembled as he reached for it. The bag was heavy, weighted with the secrets he was now certain it held. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to stop, to just go to work, to pretend he hadn't heard the lie, to let the inevitable happen. But the image of Lily, sleeping so peacefully, oblivious to the fracture lines cracking the foundation of her world, pushed him forward. He had to know. With a surge of adrenaline that left a metallic taste in his mouth, he placed the bag on their unmade bed, and his fingers found the cold, unforgiving metal of the main zipper. The sound of the zipper was a violent, metallic shriek in the quiet room, a sound he was sure she could hear even over the rush of the shower. He froze, listening, his breath held tight in his chest. He heard nothing but the steady drumming of water against tile. He exhaled slowly, a shaky, controlled breath, and pulled the zipper the rest of the way. The interior of the bag was as meticulously organized as the rest of her life. He saw a slim, matching leather wallet, a silver pen that looked impossibly expensive, a compact mirror with a mother-of-pearl inlay, and a tube of deep red lipstick. This was the surface layer, the curated collection of artifacts for the woman she presented to the world. He pushed them aside gently, his calloused mechanic's fingers feeling clumsy and brutish against the delicate silk lining. He was an intruder, a barbarian ransacking a shrine. The shame was a physical heat on his neck and face, but the cold dread in his gut was stronger. He felt along the sides, his fingers searching for anything out of place. He found a small, zippered side pocket, almost hidden in the folds of the lining. His heart hammered as he fumbled with the tiny, delicate zipper. It was stiff, and for a terrifying second, he thought it was stuck. He pictured himself having to explain to her why the zipper on her $1,000 handbag was broken. The lie he would have to invent, the way her eyes would narrow in suspicion. Finally, with a soft click, it gave way. He slid his fingers inside, the silk cool against his skin. He expected to find loose change, perhaps a receipt or a spare key. Instead, his fingers brushed against something solid, rectangular, and bound in what felt like soft, supple leather. It was a small notebook, no bigger than his hand, and he knew, with a certainty that made him feel sick, that he was holding the blueprint to his own destruction. He pulled the notebook from its hiding place. It was bound in a soft, navy blue leather, with no markings or labels on the cover. It felt expensive, personal. The pages were thick, creamy, and edged in gold leaf. He opened it, his hands shaking so violently he could barely focus on the text. What he saw was not a diary filled with emotional confessions, but something far colder, far more terrifying. It was a ledger. The handwriting was Meredith's, a perfect, slanted cursive that looked like something from a calligraphy class. The first page was titled, with chilling simplicity, The Exit Plan. Below it were meticulously organized columns and lists. He saw a name, Sterling Rhodes, written next to a series of dates and dollar amounts. He saw a budget breakdown for a security deposit on an Upper East Side apartment. He saw a list of assets to be liquidated or abandoned. And under the abandoned column, in her perfect script, was the entry, 2008 Honda Civic and contents. Contents. That meant Lily's toys. That meant the secondhand car seat. That meant him. He flipped a page and felt the air leave his lungs in a single, silent gasp. It was a list of legal terms: irrevocable deed, non-disclosure agreement, forensic accounting. She had been researching, planning, consulting with someone. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a corporate takeover of a life, and he was being ruthlessly downsized. The world tilted on its axis, the familiar lines of their bedroom seeming to warp and bend. And then he heard it. The sound that stopped his heart cold. The squeak of the faucet in the bathroom as the shower was turned off. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He stood frozen, the damning little blue book still open in his hands, while the silence from the bathroom grew more terrifying than the noise had been. It wasn't peace, it was a void, a countdown. Any second the lock would click, the door would open, and he would be caught mid-crime. His mind detonated into a chaotic reel. Meredith's face twisting into rage, the inevitable explosion, the destruction he'd spent years trying to avoid by staying quiet, by being compliant. His fingers, so precise around delicate engine components, felt like clumsy clubs. He snapped the notebook shut, the sound cracking in his skull like a gunshot. He fumbled to slide it back into the hidden pocket. The zipper snagged on silk lining. He tugged, breath catching in a raw, involuntary sob. It came free. He yanked the zipper closed, the metallic rasp a ragged scream in the still apartment. He shoved the wallet and lipstick back into the main compartment without caring about the order, just needing the bag to look untouched. The main zipper closed a split second before he heard it, the metallic click of the bathroom doorknob turning. He threw the handbag onto the dresser, almost where it had been. Almost. A fraction of an inch off, a slightly wrong angle, an error he was sure her eagle eyes would catch. He spun around, planting himself with his back to the dresser, forcing his posture into something casual, smoothing his face into a neutral mask as the bathroom door swung open. Meredith emerged in a cloud of steam, a white towel around her body and another twisted around her hair. She paused. Her eyes swept the room with that quick, proprietary scan. Inventory, control, dominance. For one eternal, heart-stopping moment, her gaze locked with his. Something flickered there. Suspicion, irritation, calculation. He couldn't tell which. Then she dismissed him and turned toward the closet as if he were furniture. The immediate crisis passed. The relief didn't. It evaporated instantly, replaced by a chilling certainty. He now knew the truth. The trip to Connecticut wasn't just a lie. It was a one-way ticket into oblivion, and he had no choice but to get in the car and let her drive. He moved with the practiced stealth of a man trying not to wake a sleeping baby, except the silence he feared breaking belonged to something far more dangerous. He kept his eyes on the bathroom door, his ears tuned to the rhythm of the water, as if sound itself could betray him. He needed more. The notebook was a declaration of war, but wars were won in logistics, in fine print, in the details that turned suspicion into certainty. His gaze swept the room in a frantic inventory of their shared life, and landed on her laptop, a sleek silver MacBook, closed on the small white desk she called her home office. Another totem of ambition, bought with a bonus she'd celebrated with a dinner he hadn't been invited to. Inside that thin aluminum shell, he knew, lay everything else. Email chains, bank transfers, digital breadcrumbs of meticulous treason. The shower was his shield. He crossed the room on socked feet that made no sound on cheap laminate, feeling the soul-deep violation of what he was about to do, and the primal need that eclipsed it. He lifted the lid. The screen flared to life, washing his face in cold white light. A password prompt blinked with infuriating patience, a gatekeeper to the armory of her betrayal. His mind, built for diagnostics, cycled possibilities with desperate logic. Anniversary date, incorrect password. The text box shook, a mocking digital sneer. Lily's birthday, numbers he could type in his sleep. Incorrect password. Cold. Impenetrable. A surge of hopeless frustration rose, locked out of her life in every conceivable way. He was about to close the lid and retreat into the horror of partial knowledge, when a detail from the notebook surfaced like a shard. Sterling Rhodes, beside a date from 6 months ago. The night she'd sworn was mandatory networking. He remembered her returning near dawn, smelling of champagne and a different perfume. Eyes bright with feverish excitement she'd blamed on landing a client. With gut-wrenching certainty, he typed that date. The screen didn't shake. It dissolved. Her desktop appeared. Pristine minimalist icons over a Hampton sunset, serene as a lie. He stared, stunned by the brazenness. The key to her secret world was the anniversary of her infidelity, a password never meant for him to discover. Something colder than panic seeped into his bones, glacial calm displacing the hot terror. This was no longer just heartbreak. He opened her email. The cursor moved with a new steadiness, the small arrow gliding across the screen like the sight on a rifle. Her inbox was organized into neat, color-coded folders: career, networking, apartment search, and one labeled simply SR. His blood went cold. He clicked it. Threads populated the screen, subject lines reading like a clinical timeline of his own undoing. Terms of agreement. Asset liquidation timeline. NDA draft. The terminology from the notebook wasn't abstract anymore. It was real. It was structured. It was underway. He opened terms of agreement and scanned Sterling's messages. There were no endearments, no romance, no passion. It was a negotiation. A venture capitalist acquiring a promising asset and managing the liabilities. Ben wasn't named. He was referenced as the Astoria entanglement and the primary liability. Sterling's conditions were crisp and brutal. Sever all ties. Ensure no future claims through a pre-signed alimony waiver. Secure every transferable asset before the extraction date. Meredith's replies were nauseatingly obedient. Assurances of complete commitment to the project. Promises of efficiency in handling the severance. He wasn't a husband. He was a problem to be handled. A strange numbness settled over him. Detached, clinical, like a forensic accountant tracing fraud through the wreckage of a bankrupt company. Only this company was his life. Then he saw an attachment on a recent email. Vance Holdings Q2 Statement. PDF. He clicked. A bank statement loaded onto the screen, and the air seemed to thin in his lungs. The header bore the logo of a private wealth management firm in the Cayman Islands, an opulent gold lion that looked like it was mocking him. The account name, Vance Holdings LLC, a corporate entity built for her exit. The opening deposit, dated 6 months ago, the same date as the password, was $250 EOZ. Transaction description, initial seed capital, SR. Ben stared at the number, his mind failing to process the scale. More than years of his salary, deposited as casually as a down payment on his erasure. He scrolled through debits. Payments to a high-powered Manhattan divorce attorney. A $10 0 charge to a private investigator. His stomach lurched. What part of his simple, transparent life had warranted professional surveillance? But it was the smaller, recurring withdrawal that shattered him. Every month, $1, $400. He stared, then understood with nauseating clarity. Rent, her half. For 6 months, every time she'd slid her check across the counter with a sigh about how tight things were. She hadn't been paying with her commission. She'd been paying with Sterling's money. She'd been a subsidized tenant in their marriage, living on enemy funding while she dismantled him from the inside. His sweat, the grease under his nails, the long hours wrestling broken machinery, reframed instantly as a foolish offering to a woman already bankrolled for his removal. Their entire partnership wasn't strained. It was staged. A performance with an audience of one, and he'd applauded it every day. He navigated away from the statement, the last warmth in him cauterized by what he'd seen. What remained was sharp-edged anger that demanded facts, not tears. He searched her hard drive for the legal documents named in the emails. A folder appeared, innocently labeled, Personal Admin. Inside, drafts. He opened one titled Irrevocable Deed Transfer. Docs. The legal language was dense, but the core was terrifyingly clear. A transfer of full title from grantor to grantee. Ben's name sat neatly on the grantor line. Meredith's name on the grantee line. For a second, confusion flickered. They didn't own property. They were renters, trapped in New York's endless churn. Then his eyes hit the property description. Coordinates, lot numbers. Familiar enough to make him go cold in a single absolute jolt. His grandfather's land. 2 acres of wooded upstate ground. His only inheritance, his only tangible link to his family's past. He remembered telling her about it on their first dates, painting a stupid, hopeful picture. Someday a small house, a 4-bay garage, a life built with his hands. Now the plan snapped into focus with horrifying clarity. Connecticut, the fake sick aunt, the manufactured emotional fog. It was all staging. Somewhere on that trip, she would place this document in front of him under some false pretense. Car paperwork, a bank form, a consent slip for Lily's school. Counting on him to be distracted, devastated, pliable. And in that vulnerable state, she would trick him into signing away the last piece of his history. This wasn't abandonment. It was liquidation, a calculated stripping of assets, and he was the final line item. The lid of the MacBook closed with a soft, final thud, returning the corner of the room to gray morning light. The screen's cold glow vanished, and Ben caught his reflection in the polished silver. But the face staring back wasn't the defeated, heartbroken man who'd opened it minutes ago. The shock had passed through him like a phase change, turning the boiling churn of grief and panic into something solid, cold, and razor-sharp. The tremor in his hands was gone, replaced by a stillness so intense it was almost frightening. He was no longer a husband discovering betrayal. He was a mechanic who'd just completed a full diagnostic on a catastrophic engine failure. He'd identified the faulty parts, traced the corrupted lines, and understood the precise geometry of the collapse. What filled him wasn't sadness, but a clean, almost arctic rage, and with it, a clarity so pure it burned away sentimentality. He thought of his father, a quiet man who'd driven a city bus for 40 years, who believed in simple truths and unspoken debts. On Ben's 18th birthday, his father had given him a small, worn leather billfold with a single, impossibly thick business card inside. "You'll never have a reason to call this number," his father had said, serious. "But if you ever find yourself in a hole so deep you can't see the sky, this man is a ladder." Ben had tucked it away like a relic from a world he didn't understand. Now he did. He moved with a new, silent economy. Closet. Top shelf. The old shoebox where he kept his father's things. The billfold opened in his palm. The card was still there. No company logo, no address. Just a name, Arthur Hemmings, and a Manhattan area code. Ben pulled out his phone, its screen a spiderweb of cracks, and dialed. His thumb was steady, precise. The man who answered on the second ring didn't say hello. He simply said, "Yes?" Ben didn't hesitate. "My name is Ben Carter," he said, his voice low and controlled, almost unfamiliar. "My father was Frank Carter. He told me to call you if my world was on fire." A pause. A brief calculation on the other end. Then the voice returned, devoid of warmth but humming with power. "It seems your father was a man who planned for contingencies. I have a meeting in 1 hour. Be there." Ben left the apartment like a ghost, silent, efficient, the opposite of the dramatic, staged exit Meredith was planning for him. He slid on his work coat, the stained canvas no longer a uniform of his class, but a disguise, perfect urban camouflage. He picked up the hated backpack, the faded blue fabric now a tool of misdirection. He didn't look at Lily's crib. Her sleeping innocence would be a crack he couldn't afford. He closed the door behind him. The soft click of the latch sounded like the cocking of a hammer. The ride from Astoria to Midtown felt like crossing into another dimension. He boarded the N train at 30th Avenue, surrounded by the city's workforce. Nurses in scrubs, construction workers in dusty boots, office assistants clutching coffee. He was one of them, invisible, another face headed toward honest, underpaid labor. The train climbed onto elevated tracks. Steel screamed against steel, a strangely comforting sound. Brick facades blurred past, walk-ups, bodegas, lives lived on the margins of the city's vast wealth. Then the car plunged into darkness beneath the East River, and when it emerged, it was into Manhattan's glittering heart. The change was immediate. The light reflected off glass and steel instead of brick. The air smelled of money, expensive perfume, street food, the clean metallic exhaust of luxury cars. He got off at Lexington and walked, his worn boots a jarring note among handmade Italian shoes. He found the address Hemmings had given him, a monolithic tower of black glass and steel that pierced the low clouds, a monument to power that could move markets and crush men without raising its voice. He pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby's frigid air hit him like a wall, and he felt 100 dismissive glances from men in suits worth more than his car. He was an anomaly, a glitch, and for the first time, he understood his invisibility wasn't weakness. It was a weapon. Hemmings, Croy, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors, a realm of hushed tones and old-world power that felt less like an office than a private club. The receptionist, a woman who looked carved from ice, took in his Carhartt jacket and backpack with barely concealed horror. But the name, Ben Carter, changed something. Her expression tightened into caution, almost fear. He was escorted down a long hallway paneled in dark mahogany. Oil paintings of stern-faced men lined the walls, the kind who looked like they'd personally financed wars. The air smelled of lemon oil, old paper, and a faint, pleasant hint of pipe tobacco. Arthur Hemmings wasn't what Ben expected. He was small and bird-like, late 70s, dressed in a perfectly tailored tweed suit that looked a century old. He stood behind a massive desk carved from a single piece of oak. His eyes, magnified by thick glasses, were sharp as a hawk's. "Frank Carter's boy," Hemmings said, voice a dry rustle. "Your father was a good man. Once pulled my son out of a burning car. A debt of that magnitude is not easily repaid. Sit." Ben didn't sit. He stepped to the desk, unzipped his backpack, and laid its contents on the polished surface. The small blue leather notebook and the stack of papers he'd printed from Meredith's laptop before erasing his trail. He didn't talk about heartbreak. He talked like a mechanic outlining a job. The primary asset is a shell company, Vance Holdings LLC, based in the Caymans. Initial seed capital of $250,000 from a Sterling Rhodes. The immediate threat is a fraudulent conveyance of real property via a forged irrevocable deed. The extraction is scheduled for tomorrow under the guise of a family emergency. Hemmings listened, fingers steepled. He picked up the notebook, scanning Meredith's perfect cursive. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. She documented her own conspiracy in calligraphy. He murmured, "Beautiful." He looked up, gaze stripping away Ben's disguise and seeing the cold, analytical mind beneath. "Your father was a simple man," he said. "But you, son, are not. She's made a critical error. She's mistaken a sleeping lion for a house cat. Now, let's discuss how we turn her meticulous ambush into her own trap." The next 4 hours were a masterclass in the architecture of financial warfare. Guided by Hemmings's whispered calls, Ben moved through Manhattan's financial district like a ghost. His first stop wasn't a bank, but a small unmarked office in a pre-war building near Wall Street, the kind that specialized in forensic accounting. A man with tired eyes and a savant's grasp of international finance took the Vance Holdings printouts and, with a few keystrokes, began tracing the flow of money through offshore accounts with quiet, almost joyful focus. "She's sloppy," the accountant murmured, more to himself than to Ben. Same routing prefix for transfers to her attorney and her private investigator. Digital fingerprint. Next came a private bank, the kind with no signs, no tellers, and a door that looked like it could withstand a blast. Inside, a vice president was waiting for him. Ben didn't deposit money, he built structures. On Hemmings' advice, he established an LLC, Carter Legacy Holdings, and within minutes, a paralegal from Hemmings' office arrived with a freshly executed quitclaim deed. Ben signed. The 2-acre plot his grandfather had left him, the target of Meredith's final act of theft, moved into the full protection of his corporate entity. Any attempt to file the irrevocable deed she carried would now be flagged as fraudulent. He opened trust accounts for Lily, structuring them to vanish from a casual asset search, brick by digital brick, a fortress around his daughter's future. His hands, used to steel and torque, moved with unnatural confidence through signatures and wires. It was a new machine, made of laws and loopholes instead of gears, and its ruthless logic felt disturbingly familiar. The final piece of the trap was elegant in its simplicity. Following Hemmings' last instruction, Ben had a cashier's check made out to Meredith Vance for $5,000, drawn from his own meager savings. He slid it into a crisp white envelope. It looked like pathetic appeasement from a clueless husband. In truth, it was bait. Returning to the apartment in early afternoon was the hardest part. He had to shed the skin of strategist and re-enter the body of the passive, wounded man Meredith expected. The ride back on the N train felt different. The working faces around him no longer felt like his reflection, but like a life he was deliberately stepping away from. He walked into the apartment and found the air thick with Meredith's perfume and the tension of her impending departure. She was on the phone, back turned, voice low and conspiratorial, finalizing logistics of his destruction. Ben said nothing. He placed the white envelope on the kitchen counter where she would find it. Then he went through the motions of his old life with an actor's precision. He showered, scrubbing away the scent of leather-bound offices, replacing it with industrial soap. He cleaned beneath his nails, erasing the last visible evidence of the morning's transformation. He emerged with a towel around his waist, his face arranged into weary resignation. Meredith's eyes landed on the envelope. She picked it up, surprise flickering before settling into contemptuous pity. She saw the check, and a small, triumphant smile touched her lips. Ben could read it. She thought it was surrender, a pathetic attempt to buy her affection or soothe his guilt. She had no idea she wasn't looking at a victim. The trip to Connecticut was still on, but it wasn't his end anymore. It was hers. For another hour, the apartment held a thick, cloying silence Ben could almost feel on his skin. He sat on the lumpy sofa, springs digging into his back, pretending to watch a muted game show. Meredith moved with brisk, purposeful efficiency, terrifying in its cleanliness. She wasn't tidying. She was erasing him. She packed a small box with a few photos of them together, sealing it with a decisive rip of tape. She removed his worn coffee mug from the dish drainer and set it apart from her pristine white ones. Each action was a surgical incision, severing memory, cutting ties. Ben felt her gaze measuring him, gauging his defeat. The $5,000 check had done exactly what Hemmings predicted. It confirmed her narrative. Ben was weak, predictable, viable. Finally, she approached and placed a thick, legal-sized manila envelope on the cheap coffee table between them. The sound was soft, but it echoed like a gavel. "Ben," she began, voice a masterclass in rehearsed compassion. "I think you know this has been over for a long time. I wanted to do this the right way, the clean way, for Lily's sake." Ben looked at her carefully constructed sorrow, then down at the envelope. The paper was thick, cream-colored stock, expensive. Nothing like the greasy invoices from the garage. It smelled faintly of her perfume and the sterile wood of a law office. He knew what was inside. He'd seen the drafts on her laptop, the digital ghosts of these documents, but he had to play his part. He let his shoulders slump, forced a tremor into his voice that wasn't entirely fake. "What is this, Mur?" She gave him a sad, pitying smile, the kind offered to a simple child. In her mind, her victory wasn't just assured, it was absolute. She sat in the armchair like a queen addressing a vanquished subject, posture ramrod straight, hands folded neatly. "It's a marital settlement agreement," she said softly. "My attorney drew it up. Very simple, very standard. It just makes everything official. She untucked the flap and slid out a thick sheaf of pages, held together by a gleaming silver clip. She placed it in front of him. The top page screamed in bold letters, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Their names followed, typed, sterile proof that the end could be formatted. Ben let his eyes glaze, feigning confusion he didn't feel. His heart hammered a slow, cold rhythm against his ribs, a war drum only he could hear. In his head, Arthur Hemmings' voice was a calm whisper. Let her talk. Let her build her own cage, bar by bar. Your job is to stay silent and hold the key. Meredith continued, her tone dripping with condescending magnanimity. "I'm not asking for alimony, Ben. I don't want to take anything from you. The agreement is simple. We each walk away with what is ours." "My assets," she said, letting the word hang with a weight Ben now understood. "And your assets. It's the fairest way." A bitter laugh tried to claw up his throat. He swallowed it. Her assets, seated with Sterling's $250,000 investment. His assets, a 10-year-old Honda and a checking account with fumes. She slid a pen across the table. A heavy, expensive silver pen that wasn't his. It came to rest beside the documents. "You just need to sign here and here," she said, tapping yellow flags marking the lines. "And we avoid a messy court battle. We both just move on." Ben looked at the signature line, an abyss waiting to swallow his name, and felt the chill of the trap he was helping her spring. He reached for the pen. It was cold and heavy in his calloused hand. Fingers used to wrenches and ratchets felt awkward around its polished barrel. He uncapped it with a soft click and positioned the nib over the first line. He let his hand hover, calculated hesitation. He had to sell this. He had to make her believe it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. He took a deep, shuddering breath, a perfect imitation of collapse, and signed. The ink flowed black and final. The scratch of pen on thick paper became the only sound in the world. His signature looked jagged, broken, exactly what she expected from a man whose life had shattered. He pushed the page back. Her eyes scanned it. A flicker of triumphant relief crossed her face before she masked it. "Good," she said softly. "This is for the best." She pulled another document from the stack. "This is a standard waiver," she said lightly. "Relinquishes any future claims. Keeps things clean." He recognized it immediately. The alimony waiver, Sterling's clause, the legal muzzle. Ben signed without reading. Movements now faster, more resigned, performing surrender. Then came the final document, disguised under the heading Disposition of Jointly Titled Assets. Only 2 pages. Ben scanned it and found the property description for his grandfather's land embedded neatly inside a paragraph about the Honda Civic. She was counting on him being too distraught, too stupid to read. He looked up, eyes wide with perfectly feigned confusion. This part, about the land. What is it? Meredith smiled. Predatory, soothing. It's nothing, honey. Just a formality for the bank. It has to list all assets, even non-liquid ones. It doesn't mean anything. The lie was bald enough to make his fury twitch against the mask, but he held. He nodded like a beaten dog and signed away the last piece of his family's history, knowing he had just armed the bomb that would vaporize her world. As the last signature dried, the atmosphere shifted. The curtain fell on her performance of the compassionate wife. Whatever warmth she'd pretended evaporated, replaced by brisk, chilling impersonality. She gathered the signed documents, tapped them into a neat stack, slid them back into the envelope with detached satisfaction. "Okay," she said, standing and smoothing her blouse. "I need you to pack a bag. Just essentials. You can arrange the rest later in the week." Ben stayed seated a heartbeat longer, forcing himself to look small. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, letting the words sound pathetic. Her expression tightened with mild annoyance, as if he were furniture that didn't move easily. "I don't know, Ben. A friend's place? Your parents. That's not my problem anymore." The cruelty was clean, almost pure. "Sterling will be here in an hour to help me start reorganizing the space," she added, saying his name like a final twist of the knife. She wanted Ben to picture another man in his home within the hour, to maximize the humiliation. Ben rose slowly, the movement of a man twice his age. He couldn't risk her seeing the glacial calm in his eyes. He turned toward the bedroom, the loneliest walk of his life, to pack a single bag that would symbolize the end. As he reached the doorway, her voice cut behind him, cold and final. "And please, for God's sake, don't take that disgusting old backpack with you. Leave it in the trash where it belongs." The air backstage was a cocktail of competing scents. Almond and cherry from catered desserts, the heavy floral haze of 1,000 perfumes drifting in from the hall, and the sharp, clean bite of freshly pressed linen from his tuxedo. Ben stood in the shadows of the wings as the city's elite murmured like a single creature. The Tom Ford suit fit him like a second skin, a universe away from stained canvas and grease. His hands, no longer mapped by grime, looked unnaturally clean, nails immaculate, calluses softened by years of spreadsheets instead of socket wrenches. He rolled the smooth cylinder of the wireless microphone in his palm, its weight an unfamiliar tool. Through a gap in velvet curtains, he saw her, Meredith. She glittered in an emerald gown that likely cost more than his entire first year at the garage. Radiant, triumphant, laughing as she held court with men who looked born into money. Her hand rested possessively on Sterling Rhodes's arm. Ben watched her with the dispassionate focus of a mechanic diagnosing a fatal flaw. He saw the calculations behind her smile, the practiced tilt of her head, the ambition that never left her eyes. She was a perfect machine of social climbing, and tonight was her coronation. The MC's voice boomed, deep and theatrical, quieting the room. "And now, it gives me great pleasure to thank our primary sponsor for this evening, a company that represents the backbone of American industry, and to introduce you to its new, visionary chairman and CEO." Ben felt stillness settle over him, not nerves. The calm after the key turns, just before the engine roars. He took one breath, and as his name was announced, he stepped out of the darkness into blinding white stage light, scanning the sea of faces until he found hers, an emerald flare in the crowd, just in time to see her triumphant smile freeze, fracture, and melt into horrified disbelief. He walked to the podium, the soft, confident beat of handmade leather shoes on polished stage. Applause rose, polite, curious. He was an unknown quantity, a ghost in their gilded world. He gripped the lectern, knuckles tight, not from panic, but from centered power. He looked straight at Meredith across the opulent expanse of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Great Hall. He watched the color drain from her face beneath expensive makeup. Her hand tightened on Sterling's arm hard enough to hurt. Sterling glanced at her, annoyed, then followed her gaze to the stage. Confusion flickered, then calculation, the first hints of dread. Ben began to speak. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, steady, carried everywhere by the microphone. "I'm honored to be here," he said, measured. "I learned the value of this company, Apex Fuel and Retail, not in a boardroom, but from the ground up. I learned it from a man named Gene Holloway, who believed there's no substitute for honest work, and that true value is often found in the places, and the people, that others overlook. Each sentence was a dart, and Ben watched them land. Meredith flinched as if struck. Sterling's face tightened as the dots connected. The woman he'd vetted, invested in, planned around, had a history she hadn't disclosed. And that history was standing on a stage, a billionaire, addressing the most powerful people in the city. Ben paused, letting silence do its work. Gene taught me that legacy isn't about what you acquire, he said, but what you build. Then he delivered the final blow, calmly, without heat. But none of this would be possible without my true inspiration, the family that gives my life its purpose. He turned and gestured to the wings. From the shadows emerged a woman of elegant, understated grace. His wife, Clara, a renowned architect whose quiet confidence made Meredith's desperate glamour look loud and cheap. And holding her hand, skipping slightly in a beautiful blue dress, was a bright-eyed 6-year-old Lily. When Meredith saw the child she'd abandoned, now radiant, adored, standing at the center of a powerful, loving family, a strangled sound escaped her throat. Her composure, her entire carefully constructed world, collapsed in a single silent public detonation. If you are enjoying this story of betrayal and calculated justice, please like this video, Ben added smoothly. It helps us bring you more stories like this. From the stage, Ben had a panoramic view of the wreckage. The crowd's murmur shifted, polite curiosity curdling into predatory excitement. 100 phones glowed as the city's elite broadcast Meredith's social execution in real time. Sterling Rhodes' face hardened into ice-cold fury. He turned toward Meredith and spoke in a tight, venomous whisper Ben couldn't hear. But the meaning was clear in the way Sterling ripped his arm away, as if her touch were toxic. A man whose entire career was risk assessment had just realized he'd made the one unforgivable mistake in their world. A bad bet. He hadn't just been deceived, he'd been made to look stupid. Without another word, Sterling turned his back and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Meredith alone in the center of the room. People parted around her instinctively, creating a circle of isolation. Her emerald gown, moments ago a symbol of arrival, now looked like a gaudy costume for a tragedy. Tears began to fall, black mascara carving thin rivers down her foundation. But Ben could see they weren't tears of remorse. They were the hot, bitter tears of a gambler who'd lost everything on a final foolish hand, the agony of a failed transaction. Camera flashes began to pop from the press pool at the edge of the hall, capturing her humiliation for eternity. Ben felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not pity. Only closure. The quiet click of a final lock turning. Clara's hand slid into his, warm and real. He looked down at Lily, who gazed up at him with uncomplicated pride. This was his revenge. Not her ruin, but his redemption. As he wrapped an arm around his wife and daughter and led them off the stage, away from the life he'd once begged to keep, Ben understood something with perfect, merciless clarity. He hadn't just escaped the trap Meredith set 5 years ago. He had built a new world she wasn't even qualified to visit. This story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity, integrity, and the love we build. Money can be lost and made, but character is forged in the choices we make when we think no one is watching. What do you think is the most valuable thing a person can have? Let us know in the comments below. The autumn light, 6 months after the gala, was a soft, golden honey that poured through the massive open bay doors of the garage. It wasn't the cramped, oil-soaked cave in Queens, but a state-of-the-art 4-bay workshop that was the heart of the Carter Legacy estate, built on the very 2-acre plot of land his grandfather had left him. The air smelled not of stale desperation and city grime, but of new concrete, curing paint on a vintage engine block, and the rich, earthy aroma of the surrounding oak trees. Ben stood before a half-restored 1968 Ford Bronco, his hands, for the first time in months, bearing the faint, familiar traces of clean motor oil. He wore a simple pair of navy blue coveralls, the Apex logo stitched discreetly over the breast pocket, a quiet nod to the empire he now commanded from this sanctuary. The Tom Ford tuxedo had been a suit of armor for a specific, necessary battle, but these coveralls were his skin. He was still a mechanic, first and foremost. The boardroom was just a different kind of engine, and he had learned its intricate workings with the same methodical patience he used to rebuild a transmission. He heard the soft crunch of gravel and turned to see Clara walking toward him, a steaming ceramic mug in each hand. her smile as warm and bright as the afternoon sun. Behind her, Lily, now a whirlwind of energy and laughter, was using colored chalk to draw a sprawling, imaginative mural on the pristine, heated concrete floor. Clara handed him a mug, her fingers brushing against his, a simple, grounding touch that was worth more than every stock certificate in his portfolio. She pointed with her chin to a slim, crisp envelope a courier had just delivered, which he had placed on his gleaming new toolbox. It was from Arthur Hemmings's office. He had already read it. It was a final clinical update on the woman who was now just a footnote in his history. After being publicly jettisoned by Sterling Rhodes, Meredith's fall had been swift and brutal. The high society world she had fought so desperately to enter had excommunicated her with ruthless efficiency. Buried under a mountain of legal debt from her failed life and Sterling's subsequent financial retaliation, she had been forced to liquidate every asset. Her last known address was a room for rent in a shared apartment in the Bronx, and her last known job was as a telemarketer selling vacation timeshares. The report was a cold, emotionless accounting of a life that had been leveraged against a future that never came. A final tally of a soul that had been sold for a price that was never paid. He folded the letter, the final invoice for a life spent chasing price tags, and realized with a quiet, chilling certainty that Meredith had never understood the incalculable difference between what something costs and what it is truly worth. He set the coffee mug down on a workbench, the warmth of the ceramic, a pleasant contrast to the cool steel of a wrench he picked up, its weight familiar and comforting in his palm. He looked at the chalk drawing on the floor, a vibrant explosion of a rainbow, a unicorn, and a smiling sun, and felt a wave of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. He thought back to the object that had once been the epicenter of their conflict, the sun-faded Graco car seat. Meredith had only ever seen its $10 garage sale price tag, a symbol of everything she felt they lacked. She never saw the hours he had spent dismantling it, scrubbing it, making it safe. She never saw the investment of time, care, and love, a currency her world didn't recognize. That was the fundamental flaw in her design, the fatal error in her calculations. She and Sterling and their entire world were traders, speculators, constantly assessing the market value of people, of relationships, of love itself. They understood acquisition, but not creation. Gene Holloway had understood. He hadn't given Ben a handout. He had given him a job, and with it, a chance to rebuild his own value from the ground up. Gene had taught him that the Apex Empire wasn't built on a single, brilliant, predatory deal, but on a billion small, honest transactions, a fair price for a tank of gas, a clean restroom, a hot cup of coffee for a weary traveler. It was a legacy of service, not status. Ben looked at the Bronco, its classic rugged lines a testament to enduring design and solid construction. He wasn't restoring it to sell. He was restoring it for Lily, a tangible piece of her grandfather's legacy and her father's love, something real in a world of fleeting digital fortunes. His new life wasn't a rejection of his old one. It was its ultimate fulfillment. He was still the man who fixed broken things, who found value where others saw none. Only now, the garage was bigger, and the future he was building was meant to last for generations. He picked up a wrench, the familiar weight a comfort in his hand, and understood the final, simple truth of his journey. Some people spend their lives trying to buy a world that looks good from the outside, while the truly wealthy are busy building one that is solid all the way to the core.